The ancient dragon Kervoth had seen 20,000 winters paint the mountains white and melt again into spring. In all those millennia, very few things surprised him anymore. The great worm had witnessed empires rise from dust and crumble back into it, had watched species evolve and go extinct, had seen magic fade from the world and flicker back to life in unexpected ways. But the small human child standing at the entrance to his cave, completely unafraid, with eyes the color of summer storms, that was surprising. "Dragon," the child said, voice clear and unwavering despite being barely tall enough to reach Kervoth's lowest claw. "I've come to bargain." Kervoth lifted his massive head from his bed of gold and jewels, precious metals that had lost their luster after centuries of serving as nothing more than a mattress. His scales, once brilliant crimson, had faded to the color of old blood and tarnished copper. Smoke curled from his nostrils as he regarded this tiny intruder. "Bargain?" His voice rumbled like thunder in the deep places of the earth. "Child, I am Kervoth the Eternal, scourge of the northern kingdoms, he who burned the fleet of sorrows. I do not bargain. I take what I wish, and what I do not wish I destroy." The child, a girl perhaps 7 or 8 human years, didn't flinch. "Then you won't want to hear about my village, which is about to be attacked by the Mordrin raiders. And you definitely won't be interested in saving it." Despite himself, Kervoth felt a flicker of curiosity, that dangerous ember that had led him into so many interesting situations over the millennia. "Why would I care about human villages? They spring up like mushrooms after rain and are just as fragile." "Because," the girl said, stepping fully into the cave now, her small boots clicking on stone that hadn't heard footsteps in decades, "if you save my village, I'll give you something you actually want." "And what?" Kervoth asked with amusement coloring his ancient voice. "Could a human child possibly possess that a dragon could want?" A question answered. The girl's smile was too knowing for her age, too weighted with something that made Kervoth's predatory instinct stir. "A question you've been asking for 300 years. The dragon's eyes, each the size of a dinner plate, narrowed to slits. 300 years ago, the memory rose unbidden, painful even after all this time. Seraphina, the knight who had not come to slay him but to seek his wisdom. The warrior who had spent 5 years climbing his mountain, not for glory or treasure, but for answers about magic that the world had forgotten. They had become, not friends exactly. Dragons didn't have friends. But something that had mattered. And then she had left, taking with her an artifact from his hoard, not stolen, but given freely, which somehow made it worse. A ring of pale gold set with a stone that held captured starlight. She had promised to return it when her quest was complete. She never came back. "I don't know what you're talking about," Kervoth lied, and knew from the child's expression that she saw right through him. "My mother," the girl said softly, "told me about the dragon who taught her that wisdom was worth more than victory. The dragon who gave her his ring as a promise that some bonds transcend species and time. The dragon who she said was the closest thing to a father she ever had." The cave was suddenly too small, the air too thick. Kervoth rose to his full height, his head scraping the cavern's ceiling, sending stalactites crashing down. "Your mother, Seraphina, is your mother." Was. The single word hit like a ballista bolt. "She died last winter, fever. She fought it like she fought everything else, with courage and stubbornness, but some enemies can't be defeated with a sword." Kervoth felt something crack in his chest, something that had calcified around a hope he'd never acknowledged. "She's..." Dead, the girl nodded, and for the first time he saw the grief in her eyes, carefully controlled but devastatingly present. She told me stories about you every night. About the dragon who was clever enough to avoid the heroes, wise enough to question everything, and kind enough, though she said you'd roast her for using that word, to teach a foolish young knight that the world was more complex than good versus evil. I am not kind, Kervoth said automatically, but his voice lacked conviction. She also said you'd say that. The girl reached into her pocket, and Kervoth tensed, ancient instinct screaming danger even though logically he knew a child couldn't harm him. What she pulled out made him forget to breathe. If dragons truly breathed in the way other creatures did. The ring. His ring. The band of pale gold catching the dim light filtering through the cave entrance, the captured star within pulsing with a gentle radiance that brought back memories so vivid he could almost smell the mountain flowers Seraphina used to bring him, could almost hear her laugh when he complained about human sentimentality. My mother wears that ring, the girl said, using present tense deliberately, Kervoth realized. She's buried with it in the grove behind our village. She said it was too precious to pass on, that it belonged with her even in death. But before she died, she made me promise to come find you, to tell you what happened, to tell you. Her voice wavered for the first time. To tell you that she never forgot her promise to return it. She just ran out of time. Kervoth stared at the ring, then at the child who held it with the same careful reverence Seraphina had shown. The resemblance was there now that he looked for it. The set of her jaw, the way she stood with weight on her back foot, ready to move in any direction. The storm-gray eyes that assessed everything with a warrior's clarity. What is your name, child? Kira, Kira Stormborn, though mother said my father gave me a different last name. She never told me who he was, but she said he was brave and kind and died before I was born. Kira's expression hardened. She said he died fighting the same Mordrin raiders who are coming for our village now. They come every few years, take what they want, burn what they don't, kill anyone who resists. And you think I should stop them? I think, Kira said carefully, that my mother once told me dragons mate for life. That when they find someone who matters, they protect them with everything they have. She said you gave her that ring as a promise, not of romance, because humans and dragons aren't compatible that way, but of family, of choice and commitment that runs deeper than blood. She looked up at him with eyes that suddenly reminded him painfully of Seraphina's gaze, direct and unflinching. She said that made me your granddaughter by choice if not by blood. And she said that if I ever needed help I couldn't find anywhere else, I should come to you. Because dragons keep their promises even when everyone else forgets. The word granddaughter hit Kervoth like a knight's lance, piercing through millennia of careful emotional armor. He had never had a child. Dragons rarely did. Their lifespans made such things complicated, and finding a compatible mate was rarer still. He had resigned himself to his eternal solitude long ago. But Seraphina had given him something else. Not a child, but a student, not offspring, but chosen family. And now her daughter stood before him, claiming that bond, extending it across the boundary between human and dragon. Why should I care? He asked, but the question was hollow, just words filling space while his ancient mind grappled with impossible feelings. I am a dragon. Humans are mayflies to me, brief sparks that flicker and fade. Because she mattered to you, Kira said simply. Because you gave her your ring, and dragons don't give away their hoard to people who don't matter. Because she told me you were lonely, even though you'd never admit it, even though you've convinced yourself that isolation is wisdom and detachment is strength. Your mother talked too much, Kervoth grumbled, but there was no heat in it. She said you'd say that too. Kira's smile was sad, knowing. She also said that you'd pretend you didn't care, that you'd growl and posture and act like helping us was beneath you. But that in the end you'd come, because that's who you actually are underneath all the scales and smoke and ancient dragon pride. Kervoth wanted to argue, wanted to roar at this presumptuous child who thought she understood him. But Seraphina had understood him, had seen through 20,000 years of carefully constructed barriers to the being beneath. Why wouldn't she have passed that knowledge to her daughter? "Tell me about her," he said instead, his voice softer than it had been in centuries. "Tell me about Seraphina's life after she left my mountain." Kira's expression transformed, grief mixing with love and pride. She became a teacher, said she'd learned more from one dragon than from 20 years of night training. She opened a school in our village, taught anyone who wanted to learn, swordcraft, yes, but also philosophy, strategy, the complexity of the world beyond simple answers. "She sounds insufferable," Kervoth said, but his heart wasn't in the insult. "She was wonderful." Kira's voice cracked slightly. "She taught me to fight, to think, to question everything. She told me stories about her adventures, about the monsters she'd faced and the people she'd saved. But her favorite stories were always about you, about the dragon who taught her wisdom." She pulled something else from her pocket, a small book, worn and well-read. "This is her journal, the one she kept during the 5 years she spent climbing your mountain and learning from you. She wanted you to have it. Said it might make you laugh, might make you understand how much those years meant to her." Kervoth's claw, large enough to crush boulders, extended with impossible delicacy to accept the journal. The leather cover was soft with age, the pages yellowed but carefully preserved. He could smell Seraphina on it still, leather oil, mountain herbs, and something indefinably human that he'd never been able to categorize. Opening it carefully, he read the first entry. "Day 1. I have decided to seek out Kervoth the Eternal against all advice and common sense. Everyone says he will eat me or incinerate me or simply ignore me until I freeze to death on his mountain. But I have questions that no one else can answer, and I would rather die seeking wisdom than live in comfortable ignorance. If these are my last words, let them show that I chose curiosity over fear." Despite everything, Kervoth felt his mouth curve into something that might have been a smile on a creature built for smiling. That was Seraphina, bold, foolish, brave, brilliant. He flipped through the pages, seeing his own words reflected back through her perspective. Lessons he'd half forgotten, conversations he'd thought meaningless at the time, now preserved and clearly treasured. And scattered throughout, observations about him that were uncomfortably accurate. "He pretends to be annoyed when I bring flowers, but I've noticed he never burns them. He arranges them carefully in a corner of his cave where the light hits them just right. I think he's lonely and has forgotten how to admit it. Kervoth told me today that attachment is weakness, that caring is the chain that binds us to suffering." Then he spent 3 hours explaining the subtle differences between various types of mountain moss, because he noticed I was interested in herbology. For someone who claims not to care, he certainly pays attention. I asked him today why he gave me the ring. He said it was just a trinket, meaningless among his vast hoard. But I've seen how he looks at it when he thinks I'm not watching. I've seen how carefully he placed it on my finger, making sure it fit perfectly. He can lie to himself, but he can't lie to me. This ring is a promise, and I will honor it for as long as I live. Kervoth closed the journal carefully, fighting against emotions he'd thought he'd buried millennia ago. When are the raiders coming? Kira's expression shifted from grief to hope to determination in an instant. Tomorrow at dawn. They always attack at dawn when people are just waking, when defenses are down. Then we have tonight to prepare. Kervoth began moving, his massive form navigating the cave with practiced ease despite its clutter. Tell me everything about your village's defenses, its weaknesses, the number of fighters you have. You're going to help. Kira's voice was small, vulnerable in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be before. Your mother was family, Kervoth said gruffly, not looking at the child. That makes you family, and dragons, despite what the stories say, protect their family with everything they have, even when it's inconvenient, even when it makes no logical sense. Even when it means leaving a comfortable cave for the first time in decades. He turned back to look at Kira, this small human child who had walked fearlessly into a dragon's lair and turned his world upside down with a handful of words and a ring. Besides, I haven't burned anything in years. I'm probably getting rusty. These raiders are doing me a favor, really, giving me an excuse to exercise. Kira's smile was radiant, transforming her grief-shadowed face into something that reminded Kervoth painfully of Seraphina's expression when she'd finally solved a particularly complex philosophical puzzle he'd set for her. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Kervoth warned, spreading his wings for the first time in years, feeling the membrane stretch and crack with disuse. "I'm old, Rusty, and I've forgotten how to properly terrify humans. I might accidentally incinerate your village instead of saving it. Mother said you were the most precise being she'd ever met, that you could write your name in fire on a grain of rice if you wanted to. Your mother was a shameless flatterer. She said you'd say that too." Despite himself, despite the grief and the surprise and the unwelcome feelings churning in his ancient chest, Kervoth laughed. A sound like rocks tumbling down a mountain, rusty from disuse but genuine. "Come then, granddaughter," he said, the word foreign and strange and somehow right on his forked tongue. "Let's go save your village, and then you're going to tell me every story about Seraphina that she didn't write in that journal. Every foolish thing she did, every victory she won, every moment of her life that I missed." Kira nodded, tears streaming down her face now, though her expression was fierce and joyful. "She also said to tell you that she loved you. That you taught her how to think, how to question, how to be brave in ways that had nothing to do with swords. That knowing you made her life richer and deeper and better." Kervoth felt something warm and painful expand in his chest, something he'd thought dead long ago. He paused, words failing him after 20,000 years of eloquence. "I loved her too, like a daughter, like a student. Like the one human in all of history who looked at me and saw not a monster or a resource or a challenge, but simply me." He lowered his head, bringing his massive eye level with Kira's small face. "I will protect you, child. Not because your mother asked me to, though she did. Not because it's noble or right, though it is. But because you are my family now, and I have learned from your mother that family is not about blood or species or logic. It's about choice. And I choose you." Kira reached out, her small hand resting on his scaled snout, warm and alive and achingly fragile. Then let's go teach these raiders what it means to threaten a dragon's family. As Kervoth launched himself into the night sky, Kira safely secured between his shoulder blades where Seraphina had once sat during their few flights together. He felt something he hadn't experienced in millennia. Purpose. Not the simple purpose of hoarding or hunting or surviving, but the complex, beautiful, terrifying purpose of protecting someone who mattered, of honoring a bond that transcended death, of being grandfather to a child who had walked fearlessly into his darkness and reminded him that even ancient dragons could still feel. The Mordrin raiders would learn tomorrow that some villages have unexpected protectors, that some children carry the courage of legendary mothers, that some promises extend beyond the grave, and that when you threaten a dragon's chosen family, you learn very quickly why the old stories counseled fear. Kervoth smiled as he flew, fire building in his chest for the first time in decades, no longer cold and alone, but alive with purpose and connection, and something that felt suspiciously like joy. Behind him, clutching his scales with small but steady hands, Kira whispered, "Thank you, grandfather." And in the darkness, flying toward dawn and battle and the future, Kervoth the Eternal finally admitted what he'd known for 300 years. Some bonds matter more than solitude, some connections are worth the pain of eventual loss, and some family is worth burning the world to protect. Tomorrow, the raiders would learn this lesson in fire and fury. Tonight, a dragon and his granddaughter flew together, carrying the memory of a remarkable woman who had built a bridge between species and left behind a legacy more precious than any golden hoard. The ring on Seraphina's finger, buried in the grove, seemed to pulse with gentle light as dawn approached, a promise kept, a circle completed. A family forged in wisdom and love and the understanding that the most powerful magic was always connection.